My father was in a band called the Squadronaires.
The Squadronaires?
Yes.
I used to hear them at Butlin.
At Butlins?
Yeah.
You probably used to see me then, because I was always there, trying to get out of the compound, climbing up the barbed wire, and I was one of the first to escape, actually.
That was in when they had those big bands. There would be about a 20-piece band.
Filey and...
Air.
Yeah, that's right. I was there, 2 years old at the time. And beautiful sand dune beach, I remember. One of my earliest memories is on the beach up there.
At Air, yes. Yeah. And he played the saxophone, didn't he?
Yeah, he was one of the founder members. They were an Air Force band, and after the war they continued, I think for 3 or 4 years they used to play in uniform, RAF uniforms. There's Something in the Air was their theme tune. And it was really my first sort of taste of show business sort of came from seeing my father on the stage and hearing my mother on record, because my mother started as a singer with the Squadronaires. And seeing my father on stage, he always used to smile, this plastic smile like this. That's show business.
Was it tenor saxophone he played?
No, alto.
Alto.
Cliff Townshend and his singing saxophone.
Did it encourage you to learn musical instruments early on?
Really, no. I just used to stack the bottles up at bottle parties. No, I used to muck about on the mouth organ. And that's about as far as it got, really. And I was very frustrated musically. We didn't have a piano, and we had a terrible old radio and radiogram, and my father went berserk if I touched his instruments, because clarinets and saxophones are very delicate. So I never really had any access to musical instruments until I actually went out and bought one, which was when I was about 12, or my grandmother bought me a guitar for Christmas.
Bought you a guitar for Christmas when you were 12?
Mm.
That was in 1957?
Something like that, yeah.
Why did she buy you a guitar for Christmas?
Because I asked for one.
And all your heroes at that time were singers, pop stars?
I wasn't very interested in sport. And I can't really remember having any specific hobbies at all. I used to like toys up to the age of about 12. I used to like model railways and riding my bike. I was a fanatical bike rider, an explorer and things like that. But until I got the guitar, I was kind of getting dragged along with all the rest of the gang, going to Ackerbilk concerts or going down the park and trying to chat up a couple of local women, and I really didn't fit into all this. The kind of people that I used to hang out with, although they were the same age as me, they were always taller, better dressed, better looking, and I think what they found amusing in me might have either been my sense of humour or the fact that I was the bloke that you hit on the head or something like that. Anyway, they were always superior in some way or another, and I realised that the only way I was ever going to fit into society and have a role was via this guitar. I really did think this. I thought, I'll go and I'll shut myself in my room and I'll learn the guitar, and when I come out they'll want me. And that's exactly what happened. I went, shut myself in a room for 2 years doing paper rounds to buy strings and things like that. Came out at the end of the 2 years and immediately joined the Who, and that's the way it's been ever since.
And you learned the guitar on your own without any help from your father or your mother or even your grandma? My
father always used to tell me to read music. He said, learn to read music, otherwise you won't get anywhere. And of course this was, because the tradition that he'd been brought up in was the fact that, you walked into a studio or a session or a gig or whatever, and they throw the music in front of you and you're supposed to be able to play it. Things are different these days, as you know.
But at that time, were your heroes Presley and people, or were you still sticking to the...
I didn't like Elvis Presley much at all. I used to like some of the trad people. I used to like the Shadows, and could stand Cliff Richard, but without being disrespectful to him as a person, I found him then even more kind of syrupy than he is today. I mean, at least today he's wholesome. There was something awful about this syrupy person trying to masquerade as a tough nut. I used to like the more honest rock and roll performers, like I liked Bill Haley. because he would, you know,
With that sort of
it was awful and didn't-
quiff of integrity, yeah.
I think.
You mean because he was awful, you liked him?
No, I remember we were on the Isle of Man, and I had the privilege of seeing the previews every Saturday morning at the local cinema of the films that were going to be run during the week. And my friend and I that were staying with me, we were both about 11, 12 years old, and we went to see Rock Around the Clock. And I remember the chill ran up my spine as I heard them native rhythms. And no, it really was. And I looked round at my father and I said, "What is this music? It's amazing music, you know."
And what did he say?
He said, "Oh, it's not bad. Not bad, is it?" And that was really all, you know.
And when you came out, you walked straight into The Who. I mean, you met the three people who are now part of The Who with you.
Well, I've known John Entwistle, who's the bass player in the group, the longest. Yeah. And when I really got the guitar, and I was actually playing banjo badly in a band that John Entwistle played trumpet in. And these were the superiors that I was talking about earlier on, while playing the banjo and just being dragged around by me scruffy scruff of my neck. I was actually studying the guitar and posing in front of the mirror and trying to reduce the size of my nose by osmosis or whatever. And
hypnosis.
yeah. And no,
Roger,
it used to be a very runny nose.
blotting paper.
Yeah. And when I finally got good enough to join the group that John had then joined, he'd joined up with Roger Daughtry, who was then a lead guitar player, and I joined the group as a rhythm player.
And Keith Moon?
Much later.
Much later.
Yeah.
So the three of you were about 14 and 15, knocking around. Did you already decide that was it, you were going to be a group? There's no two ways about it.
Well, I suppose it was a bit dreamland. I remember going in for lots of things like Butlin's auditions and failing and, you know, going through 100 drummers, and they were all... One drummer we had just previous to Keith was excellent, but he was much older than us, and we always saw ourselves as you know, the new young idea, and he was a bricklayer. He was about 30 years old. Very good drummer, but didn't fit in. My first taste of ruthlessness was the day we came to throw him out, and the group wouldn't do it, and I just turned round to him and said, "Listen, you've got to go. And I don't think he's spoken a word to me since. But
how old are you then?
I can't remember. About 17, I suppose.
Were you already sort of semi-professional then?
Yeah. I was at art college, so I was spending the government's money from the grant and to buy guitars and things like that, and going into college every day because I liked it. I liked the people at college. I had a lot of friends there, and it was through going to art college that I came on rhythm and blues. I heard everything from Leadbelly for the first time, you know, the genuine article, the genuine version of Rock Island Line and stuff like that. And I heard people like Booker T, who's now very famous, but then was very obscure. Lightning Hopkins, Jimmy Reed, everybody really. I mean, Chuck Berry in large doses. I'd never heard Chuck Berry or people like that. Ray Charles.
Totally American,
all black American stuff. Mainly black American stuff. Mose Allison was another great influence on me, and he was a white American, but everybody thought he was black. So.
But this time you're 17, and there's no two ways about it that you've decided that you're going to play music for the rest of your life. What did your parents would obviously be quite pleased about that, were they?
Well, my parents were a great help. I mean, not just... I mean, they didn't... As I give the impression that they weren't encouraging. I mean, they weren't encouraging in a sense that, you know, they sat and said, you know, go on and knock it to them. I mean, they actually used to help physically. My mother was our road manager for years and years.
She drove the van?
Drove the van and helped me in and out with the gear, which we stored in our house, and actually managed the group.
Were you aware that there were other groups coming up all over England at that time? Were you aware of the Beatles, and were you aware of the Stones and so on?
Not really. I mean, but it was a very, very vague world that we lived in. Very vague. I mean, I was aware of the Stones because they started in Ealing and Richmond, and I used to go to Richmond and hang about by the river there at weekends, and they used to play there, and used to hear talk about them. But this is later on. In fact, one of the first gigs I used to do was at a place called the Ealing Club, a seedy little club near Ealing Broadway Station. And I think that was the first place that Mick Jagger, Keith Richard and Charlie Watts ever played together. And I think that was with Alexis Corner.
Yeah.
And I was there that night, lurking around in the back. I didn't really take much notice. I thought Mick Jagger was horrible. And the next time we encountered the Stones, we were backing them up on this pub circuit. The pub circuit had a couple of ballrooms, St Mary's Ballroom, Putney, and we played with the Stones. And I think we learnt more about rock theatre that night than I've never ever been zapped like that. When you're not ready for somebody's presence on the stage. I mean, Mick Jagger walked in and was a star to me. I mean, I don't get this feeling from Zsa Zsa Gabor or from, Fred Emney. I mean, I get it from people like Mick Jagger when they walk on the stage, or even to a great degree from people that adopt these mannerisms like David Bowie. I mean, I get a great sense of presence from them.
Yeah.
From watching Roger on film, which I've obviously been doing a lot of lately. Its presence is something which is either there or it isn't. I suppose you can assume it, but there's a particular kind of presence which is associated in rock. And in those days, one didn't see it very often. And I saw Mick Jagger on the stage, and God, I mean, it did me in.
After being a backup group to all these other groups, you became a head-on group when you made your first record, which was In the Face, wasn't it?
I'm the Face.
I'm the Face, I'm sorry. I'm the Face. And then you appeared on television on Ready, Steady, Go, and you started off as a important group in the public eye in that way. Is that Keith Moon was with you then, was he?
Yeah, Keith joined just prior to our first recording session. We were taking a recording audition, and the producer at the time, Chris Parmienter, I think it was, didn't like our drummer, and we thought, as I said earlier, or rub it in, but thought he was a bit too old for the group.
Yeah.
And Keith Moon turned up one day. We threw the drummer out and had a dep in temporarily. Keith Moon rolled up one day, all ginger all over, ginger shoes, ginger corduroy trousers, ginger jacket, and his hair dyed ginger, holding a glass of brown ale. So his complete ginger sort of vision came up and said, I can play better than him. And this horrible impudent with his hair down like this. And got up on the drummer's drum kit and practically smashed it to pieces. And we thought, this is the man for us. And he joined the group, and completely, I mean, the reorientation that went on when he joined the group was, I mean, remarkable. He affected everybody very greatly musically, and I suppose 2 months later we were in the recording studio.
There's a bill here, or an account of 1 week, almost exactly 4 years ago. Exactly 10 years ago.
Yeah.
When you had played in that week at the Social Club in Goldhawk Road, and the California Ballroom in Dunstable, and the Railway Arms in Neasden. And what you'd made that week was £370. And what you'd spent was £1,946, 17 and including £785 on replacement of guitars, drum kits and microphones. Well, two questions. Who covered that gap in money, that £400 gap, which left £1,300 to find every week?
It's hard to say. I used to rush into Marshall's music shop and steal guitars off the wall. I'd say, just taking a guitar, pay you Tuesday, and rush out. And that would be the guitar for the next couple of months, because I didn't smash a guitar every night. I used to bounce it about and maybe repair it, stick it back together again. And, you know, I mean, they were hard times. But if there was Kit Lambert, our manager, then would sort of rush past, photographer from the Daily Mail in the audience, smash a guitar. So smash the guitar all over the state and come back, Pete, sorry, you missed it. Can you smash another one? I'll give you the money. So I'd smash up another one. You know, these are Rickenbacker 12 strings, which I used to use, which cost, I think, £406 each. And I should have used something taxier. And it became a habit.
Ukulele.
And as soon as I started smashing something up, Keith, who's a great sort of joiner in there, used to smash up his drum kit. That guitar started to be, to me, like the way my head always used to go is I used to think this is like smashing up this stupid thing which, you know, it's hard to explain. It's everything that I was this guitar. And as I told you earlier, it's what it's how I became a man, was through the guitar. And it's great still to this day to smash them up and just say, wood, garbage, you know, I'm what counts. And, you know, I've got through some great instruments, I'm afraid, very sorry, but, you know, a lot of trash too, so.
There's a lot of talk in the 60s, and The Who was always included in this, about revolution, it being a revolutionary period. Great claims have been made for rock music, haven't they, that they have sort of helped and inspired and lubricated a change of feeling, changes of attitude towards the way society conducts itself, and so on and so forth. Do you think these claims are justified?
Music is a spiritual medium, there's no doubt about it. It's an elevator of the spirit. I mean, you listen to certain pieces of classical music in order to get a specific high. I mean, it's like almost like a meditative process. You listen to the Alleluia chorus to become spiritually elevated. You know, I mean, there are rock songs that do that to me. They elevate me as much, if not more, these little 3-chord wonders. You know, and I mean, this is something which, when you're subjected to a lot of music over a long period, you see a lot of performances. You become part of an industry which is self-sufficient and a proud industry in a way, which makes a lot of money, in other words, and can hold its own in terms of being a separate society, and is supported by the people, like football is supported by the people. You start to realise in a way that what you're doing is holding water, because what turns you on, what elevates you, also elevates them. So you become like a barometer. It's really... I know this is putting it in terms of music, and perhaps it's a bit preposterous because rock has got a whole lot of other things going for it, and I know that's what you're prodding at. But taken from a musical point, that's really a lot of what it's all about. Great events like Woodstock, for example, are musical events.
That's very odd. I was going to actually go to Woodstock, because that was the end of the 60s. That seemed to sum up an awful lot about rock. It was the time when, I mean, you were the great star of Woodstock. Woodstock itself was one of the biggest pop events in world terms because of the film that masses and millions of people had seen. And it was a marvellous thing in its way. But just as a matter of interest, what do you think it changed? What was different after it? What did that generation, all those people, being given the same high by the same thing, and yourself and so on, what did it change? I'm just interested to know.
Well, it changed me. I hated it. I took my 6-month-old child, and very, very, very weird. Didn't like it at all. They dumped us out of a limousine into 6 foot of mud, and we stood there for 5 hours waiting to go on. Drank a cup of coffee. 5 minutes later, I'm on an LSD trip, unwillingly.
They'd put LSD in the coffee?
Yeah, LSD in the coffee, LSD in the mud. If you fell over and accidentally drugged some muddy water, you're on a trip. I mean, I'm not a great champion, I'm afraid, of the revolution anymore. And I'm harsh critic because of the fact that I am accused of letting the side down, as it were, often by our fans. You know, you can't, like, for example, like you can't stop doing this. You can't stop doing what you're doing because you let down all these people. It's not people just saying, listen, you'll disappoint your fans if you don't go on. The show must go on. You must go on, otherwise all those people will be so upset. It's, you've got to go on, man. Otherwise, all those kids, they'll be finished. They'll have nothing to live for. That's rock and roll.
Why did you write Tommy this? You described it as a pretentious rock opera. I mean,
I said it was seen as a pretentious concept.
I think it's a very good rock opera. It's 6 years ago you wrote it. Why did you set out to write a rock opera, or did you write a song that turned into a rock? How did it?
Kit Lambert is the
enter Kit Lambert having he can't afford to pay for any more guitars.
Well, as Willie Walton's godson, I suppose he had to make his contribution to the arts, which was we made our second album, which he produced, and it was during that album, which, as I said, Kit Lambert produced, that we really realised what making albums was all about. We had great fun, and it was very creative, and Kit was learning about record production and doing crazy things like recording the group from a microphone down the corridor and all these things, which are very commonplace nowadays, but using incredible amounts of compression and squeezing the sound up, squeezing cymbal sounds up to make them sound like steam engines, and various sort of twiddling knobs as the recording was going, and the engineers throwing their hands in the air. It's platinum coated knobs, mate, you can't do that. And all this was going on in the studio, but unfortunately we had 10 minutes on the album to fill when we'd finished. And so Kit turned around to me and said, I think you should write something linear, something with continuity, perhaps a 10-minute song. So I said, you can't write a 10-minute song. I mean, rock songs are 2 minutes 50 by tradition. It's one of the traditions, they only allowed you one modulation, 4 chords or 5, 5 chords. You might be up before the committee, but that was basically it. 10 minutes, it's ridiculous. So he said, well, listen, if you can't write a 10-minute song, write a 10-minute story made up of 2-minute 50 songs, right? Which I did, and that was the mini opera, it was called, and it was a comedy thing about an engine driver that seduces a girl while her lover is away, and when the lover returns he forgives them, and it ends up with this sort of terrible sort of Italian operatic takeoff at the end where we all sing, you are forgiven, 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 and it was a spoof, but the Beatles were impressed and went on to do Sgt. Pepper. I'm not saying it was a direct influence. I mean, obviously things were going in that direction. But Paul McCartney, actually said, great new album, that mini opera, fantastic, great idea. Something's going to come of that. That was his words. And much encouraged, I laid plans to write a bigger one.
How did you actually start writing songs in the first place? I mean, how did you write your first song?
Well, I mucked about a bit writing stuff when we were doing the pub circuit before we ever recorded. But as I said, Pete Meaden, who was our publicity man, wrote our first record. And when that failed miserably, sold about 3 copies. I'm the Face, that was worth about £1,000 a copy now. We went for our next recording audition at Abbey Road, where the Beatles recorded, and they said, well, we think you're a great band, a great R&B band, but the Beatles have set a trend of groups writing their own material. All the Liverpudlian groups write their own material, the Stones write their own material. You've just really got to do it. So away we walked, and everybody looked round, and who's going to write? And me being at art school and being able to say long words like perspicacity, which I heard on a Spike Milligan album, was elected to do the job. And about 10 weeks later, the song that I'd written, Can't Explain, was number 8 in the charts. So, you know, it all seemed very automatic and easy to me.
And did Tommy seem easy? I mean, that's because that is
It was,
quite
it
long
was pretty difficult.
and arduous. How long did it take you to write that?
Oh, long time.
It was a great hit, wasn't it?
It was, yeah.
It paid off all your debts and made you millionaires. What was that like? Was it a nice change?
Well, one becomes a millionaire quite slowly. It hasn't happened yet. I don't really know. I think there are good things about being able to sort of buy what you want, and bad things. I mean, I'm not as well off in a hard cash sense than I'd like to be. I'd like to have money in the bank, kind of thing, that I could go and spend in a silly way occasionally. But generally, it's great to know that something like Tommy sells a certain number of copies every year, and as the group will get royalties through it. It's security. Whether or not it's a good thing for a rock group, I don't know. It definitely slowed us down.
This followed a rather hectic time with drugs, which you renounced, like renouncing the devil and all his works. Is that right?
Yeah, it's the evil past I had to, yeah. The evil vengeance, because I had born with a big nose, you see. I thought... The drugs period of my life was, as I told you, it was very obsessive when I was at art school. My introduction to marijuana, which is a very insidious drug, coincided with my introduction to rhythm and blues music. Great music, and insidious drug. And the two became almost interlocked. The hearing of music and the kind of smoky, gentle psychedelic thing that went along with drugs. Yeah. And from there I went the whole gamut. I ended up at a very famous festival, Monterey Pop Festival, which was littered with. I mean, that, I suppose in a way, if any example of the drug culture has ever been, it's been Monterey, where the police were surprised because all these horrible, dirty hippies behaved so peacefully. It was because a lot of them were using drugs of, a hallucinogenic type, which were making the world a peaceful, beautiful place. Well, if they weren't taking LSD, which wasn't that common, they were using pop, which is a mild hallucinogenic. And on the plane, on the way back, I looked through my pockets and I found a pill which somebody had given me, which was called STP, a very powerful hallucinogenic, much more powerful than acid. It's supposed to be 20 times more powerful, which Keith Moon produced a similar one and said, let's while away the hours with a trip. See? So I thought, well, I can't leave him to go off on his own. I mean, it's probably nonsense to your average viewer, because they don't realise exactly what a trip is. It really is a terrifying journey. If it can be wonderful, but it can also be terrifying. And so I felt that I should accompany him on this journey and knock mine back. And about 15 minutes later was a frothing at the mouth. Blech. I was having visions of the most unbelievable nature. Now remember, I'd had LSD before many times, and I'd had bad trips on LSD many times, but nothing like this. It was, at one point I was so disgusted with what I was and what I was thinking and my body and the way I felt that I actually left my body. And in Quadrophenia there's a bit in the little story that I write in the cover, how the kid leaves his body and looks at himself sitting in the railway carriage. That happened to me on this aeroplane. We were up in the sky, and I was looking down at myself in the seat. And then in the end I realised I must go back, otherwise I was going to die. And about 3 weeks later I thought about it, and I thought, it really did happen. It really did happen. I really did leave my body to avoid these horrible sensations. And I did avoid them. And yet I could still see, and I could still hear, and I still existed. And then I went back in again, and I thought maybe there is something to the soul or something. And then I started to look around. I would never have ever touched drugs after that anyway, ever, because the shock of that bad trip was so stunning and so awful that I didn't smoke a cigarette for about four years afterwards. I can now smoke.
Actually, that experience that you describe happens to quite a few people without drugs, as a matter of fact. I mean, the idea of leaving your body and looking at yourself is something to do with hysteria and neurotic unbalance in a lot of people. But one of the things about quadrophenia is that it's instead of schizophrenia, it's 4 minds instead of 2 minds, but the 4 minds are the 4 minds of the group.
Jimmy is the hero. Jimmy is the hero of the thing. He is an average kid, but he's made up of 4 sort of archetypal, extreme personality types, and one is reflected as a reflection of Roger's personality, which is tough and assertive, and the other is Keith Moon's personality type, which is devil may care, I'll take anything, I'll eat anything, I'll jump off Tower Bridge sort of thing, who cares. The other is John Entwistle aspect, who is a great secret romantic, and I thought this would be nice to let the world know what a romantic he was. He's the romantic side, the Hollywood type, dream-laden type thing, that that there is a girl somewhere, the perfect girl, the perfect life, the perfect sitting room where the television is good all day long, and no pollution and stuff. And the other side, it was my side, which is the mystical, frustrated seeker, I suppose, a spiritual sort of spiritually desperate was the way I described it, because I think that's really pretty much the way I am at the moment. I don't really know if I become more and more desperate all the time. It's like the more I learn about myself, the more desperate I become to sort it all out. And those are the 4 facets we've all shared in the group, and maybe this is one of the magic things that holds us all together, is that we've all shared the experience, a simultaneous experience of forgetting who we are at a rock concert, losing ourselves in sort of completely sort of egoless, I suppose it's almost like a meditative experience. When the music gets so good and the audience are so relaxed and free and happy, because the music isn't just good music, it's also dance music and makes you want to dance, that everybody for a second forgets completely who they are and where they are, and they don't care. They just know that they're happy, and that now is now, and that life is great, and what does it matter if they're a big star, and you forget that you're supposedly a big star. You just know you're playing the guitar, and for a moment you're happy, you're one of the audience, or one of a crowd of people. It's rock and roll. That's when things become, when I suppose people start to feel and maybe talk about rock and roll in a religious sense, because it does have this meditative. If you experience that enough times, it starts to become something that you strive for, because it's so sweet. There's definitely some magic that happens at a Who performance, and at any great rock performance, I think, any good, solid rock performance. I enjoyed playing Charlton very much.
Why did you decide to play at Charlton Athletic?
It was the idea of a guy, Pete Allen. He was involved in a company called Greasy Truckers that did underground promotions, and he wanted to do a big summer festival and was talking to us about it. and suggested Charlton because it was in a natural valley. And we looked at it more closely, and 2 years later it actually came together.
You go down and size up the sort of sound possibilities and where you put your speakers. I mean, do you take a lot of care over where the speakers go?
I don't. So we've got a sound man, Bob Pridden, who's untouchable.
How many people work for you when you do a concert?
Quite a lot. I'm not really sure.
About 20, 30?
It could be more, it could be less. I'm not really sure. I know how many. We have individual roadies. Like I have a man that looks after my guitar equipment, and Keith has a drum man, and we have a sound mixer who looks after PA.